The massive crystal walls of Nexus Station gleamed under the artificial suns that powered the diplomatic hub. Ships from dozens of worlds hung in the darkness outside, their hulls reflecting the station's pale blue light. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, representatives from across the galaxy took their seats for another quarterly meeting of the Galactic Council. Kim, Tejo adjusted his simple black suit and checked his watch. Earth time showed 14:30, but here in neutral space, time meant little. What mattered was that he had arrived exactly when protocol demanded, not too early to seem eager, not too late to appear disrespectful. He had learned these small lessons. Over his 5 years as Earth's primary envoy, the hall itself was a wonder of engineering. The floor was made of some transparent material that let visitors see the stars below their feet. Curved walls rose up in smooth arcs, meeting at a dome. Overhead that showed the swirling colors of the nearby nebula. Each delegation had their own section, designed to accommodate different body types and environmental needs. Te-Ho took his place at the human section, a modest cluster of chairs near the back. Next to him sat Park So-young, Earth's military. Attached, she wore a crisp blue uniform with minimal decorations. Humans had learned early that flashy displays of rank or achievement often annoyed other species. So-young opened her tablet and began reviewing the day's agenda with practiced efficiency. "Same old topics," she murmured to Tejo in Korean. "Trade routes, mining rights, and someone complaining about border violations." Tejo nodded but said nothing. Around them, the hall was filling with beings that still amazed him after all these years. The Saurians entered with their usual dramatic flair, their scaled bodies catching the light as they moved. Their leader, Vexstar, was particularly impressive, nearly 3 meters tall with golden scales and eyes like polished amber. The Saurians had been expanding their territory aggressively for the past decade, and their military reputation made smaller species nervous. The Aetherians arrived next, floating rather than walking. Quillith, their ancient representative, appeared as a shimmering outline of light that barely suggested a humanoid form. The Aetherians claimed to be one of the oldest species in the galaxy, with psychic abilities that let them communicate without words. They often acted superior to younger species, though they did it politely. The Kronax made their entrance with heavy footsteps that echoed through the hall. Bront, their ambassador, stood nearly as tall as the Saurians, but was built like a fortress. Thick limbs, broad chest, and skin that looked like gray stone. The Kronax were warriors by culture, prizing strength and directness above all else. They found human diplomacy confusing and often said so. Dozens of other species filed in, the insectoid hive delegates with their clicking mandibles, the plant-like Verdani swaying gently as they moved, the mechanical synthetics with their precise movements. Each group settled into their designated areas, creating a living museum of galactic diversity. Tejo watched it all with quiet interest. When Earth had first joined the Galactic Council 50 years ago, humans had been overwhelmed by the variety of life they encountered. Now, after decades of diplomatic contact, the wonder remained but was tempered by understanding. Each species had their strengths, their weaknesses, their particular ways of seeing the universe. The session began with the usual formalities. Chancellor Vorthak, an elderly Centauran with 4 arms and a voice like grinding stone, called for order. The first item on the agenda was a trade dispute between the aquatic deepers and the silicon-based Cristarch. Both sides presented their cases with the kind of dry, technical language that made even experienced diplomats struggle to stay awake. Te-Ho listened carefully anyway. Details that seemed boring often contained important information. The Deepers were having trouble with their deep-sea mining operations. The Cristarch were expanding into new asteroid fields. These facts might matter later in ways no one could predict now. The morning dragged on with similar disputes. A territorial argument between 2 minor species. Complaints about shipping delays along the outer rim routes. A request for medical aid from a planet dealing with a plague of crop-eating insects. Standard council business resolved through standard diplomatic procedures. During these discussions, humans rarely spoke. Earth was still considered a junior member of the galactic community, despite 5 decades of membership. Most species saw humans as useful but unremarkable, good at adapting, decent at trade, but lacking the military might of the Saurians or the ancient wisdom of the Aetherians. This suited Taeho fine. Being underestimated had its advantages. Park So-young occasionally made notes on her tablet, but mostly she observed. Her job was to assess military and security implications of council decisions, though she rarely shared her thoughts openly. Humans had learned to keep their strategic thinking private. As the morning session ended, delegates began moving toward the refreshment areas. The station provided food and drink suitable for most species, though humans usually brought their own coffee. Taeho and So-young walked together toward the human section of the dining area. "Notice anything interesting?" Taeho asked quietly. "The Saurians are nervous about something," So-young replied. "Vexstar keeps checking his communication device. And the Kronak delegation is larger than usual. Bront brought 3 security officers instead of his normal one. The Verdani seem agitated too. Their color shifts are more frequent than normal." They collected their coffee and found a quiet table. Around them, other species clustered in their own groups, following the informal social patterns that had developed over decades. Of these meetings, the Aetherians floated near the viewing windows, apparently meditating. The Kronaks gathered around large portions of some kind of fermented drink. The Saurians stood in formal groupings, speaking in their hissing language. Few species mixed socially during breaks. Humans often sat alone, which reinforced their image as minor players in galactic politics. This isolation had once bothered Earth's early diplomats, but Taeho had come to appreciate it. Privacy meant freedom to observe without being observed. In return, the afternoon session focused on resource allocation, always a contentious topic. Several species needed rare minerals for their technology. Others wanted access to agricultural worlds. The Galactic Council tried to balance these needs fairly, but fairness was complicated when species had such different capabilities and requirements. As the discussions continued, tensions began to show. The Saurians hinted that they might need to expand their mining operations into disputed territories. The Kronaks spoke bluntly about defending their trade routes by force if necessary. Even the normally peaceful Verdani mentioned concerns about protecting their seed worlds from aggressive neighbors. Taeho watched these exchanges with growing interest. The galaxy seemed more unstable than usual, with multiple species feeling pressure to secure their interests through strength rather than negotiation. It was exactly the kind of situation that human analysts had been tracking for months. The session ended with several issues unresolved, which was also normal. Real decisions happened in private meetings between individual species, not in the Grand Assembly. As delegates began filing out, conversations continued in small groups throughout the hall. Taeho gathered his papers slowly, giving So-young time to finish her notes. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more disputes, and more opportunities to observe the complex dance of galactic politics. For now, though, his work was done. He looked around the emptying hall one more time, noting which species were still talking and which were leaving alone. Information was everywhere for those who knew how to see it, and humans had become very good at seeing. The second day of meetings began with the same formal procedures as always. Chancellor Vorthic's 4 arms moved in ceremonial gestures as he opened the session, his voice echoing through the crystal hall. The morning discussions covered shipping, regulations and communication protocols, topics that made even the most dedicated diplomats check their time devices frequently. Taeho sat in his usual position, sipping coffee from a metal cup that bore Earth's simple blue and green symbol. Park So-young reviewed her notes from the previous day, occasionally making small marks with her stylus. Around them, other delegates showed varying degrees of attention to the proceedings. The Saurian delegation looked restless. Vexstar's golden scales caught the light as he shifted in his seat, and his amber eyes frequently scanned the room rather than focusing on the speakers. His subordinates whispered among themselves in their hissing language, their forked tongues flicking out in What humans had learned were signs of agitation. The morning break came as a relief to most delegates. Species clustered in their usual groups, but today the conversations seemed more intense than normal. The Kronax spoke in louder voices than usual. The ethereal Aetherians pulsed with faster light patterns. Even the normally calm Verdani swayed more rapidly, their leaf-like appendages rustling with nervous energy. Teho and So Young found their customary quiet table near the viewing windows. Outside, the nebulous colors shifted slowly from purple to deep red, creating an impressive backdrop for the diplomatic theater inside. "Something's building," So Young said quietly, speaking Korean to ensure privacy. The security briefings from last night mentioned increased military movements in 3 different sectors. "Which ones?" Teho asked, though he suspected he already knew. Saurian expansion fleets near the outer rim, Kronak patrol groups doubling their usual routes. And the synthetic collective has gone completely silent, no communications with anyone for the past week. Teho nodded. The synthetics only went quiet when they were calculating something important, usually something involving conflict scenarios. Their mechanical minds could process millions of variables, but they needed isolation to do their deepest thinking. The afternoon session focused on territorial disputes, which always created tension. 3 different species claimed mining rights to the same asteroid field. 2 others argued over the boundaries of an uninhabited star system. The discussions grew heated as each side presented evidence for their claims. During a particularly intense exchange between the aquatic deepers and the silicon crystarch, Vextar suddenly stood up. His 3-meter frame commanded immediate attention, and the hall fell silent. "This endless arguing serves no purpose," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "We debate over scraps while real threats gather in the darkness. The galaxy grows more dangerous each day, yet we pretend that words and treaties will protect us." Chancellor Vorthak's forearms gestured for calm. "Ambassador Vextar, please remember our protocols for addressing the assembly." "Protocols," Vextar hissed, his tongue flicking out in disdain. "When the Void Hunters attacked the Kepler colonies last month, protocols did not save those worlds. When the rogue II fleet disappeared into dark space, protocols did not track them down." Murmurs spread through the assembly. The Void Hunters were a mysterious enemy that appeared without warning, destroyed everything they found, then vanished again. The rogue AI fleet was a group of rebel synthetics who had rejected the collective and turned to piracy. Both were serious threats that the Galactic Council had struggled to address. Quillith, the ancient Aetheron, floated forward slightly. Their light form pulsed with what humans had learned indicated deep thought. "What do you propose, Vextar?" "Military action has risks. War spreads like fire through dry grass. Some fires burn away disease," Vextar replied. "The Saurian Empire has maintained order in our sectors for centuries. We understand that strength prevents conflict better than weakness invites it." Bront, the Kronak ambassador, stood up with a sound like stone grinding against stone. "The Kronaks agree. Our fleets patrol the trade routes because traders respect force, not treaties. Pirates do not negotiate. They understand only the language of plasma cannons." Other delegates began speaking at once, some supporting military solutions, others arguing for diplomatic approaches. The controlled atmosphere of the council session was breaking down into something closer to an argument between warriors in a tavern. Teho watched the exchanges with growing interest. This was exactly the kind of situation that human analysts found most revealing. When species felt threatened, they showed their true nature. The Saurians revealed their imperial ambitions. The Kronaks displayed their warrior culture. The Aetherons demonstrated their ancient caution. Chancellor Vorthak finally restored order by activating the hall's sound-dampening field, which made it impossible for anyone except the recognized speaker to be heard clearly. "We will address security concerns through proper channels," he announced. "This assembly is not a war council." But the damage was done. The facade of polite diplomacy had cracked, revealing the tensions underneath. During the next break, conversations became even more intense. Species that rarely spoke to each other began forming small groups, clearly discussing alliance possibilities. The Saurians approached several smaller species, likely offering protection in exchange for resources or territory. The Kronax gathered with other military-focused cultures, probably discussing joint patrol operations. The Etherians floated in a tight cluster, their light forms flickering in rapid patterns that indicated urgent communication. As the day progressed, the discussions became increasingly focused on hypothetical conflict scenarios. What would happen if the Void Hunters attacked major population centers? How could the galaxy respond to coordinated pirate attacks? What defenses existed against rogue infiltration? Each species offered their own expertise. The Saurians spoke of their battle fleets and fortress worlds. The Kronax described their warrior training and combat experience. The Etherians mentioned their psychic early warning networks. The synthetics, when they bothered to respond at all, provided statistical analyses of various threat probabilities. Humans, as usual, said little during these discussions. When asked directly for their opinions, Tejo gave polite but vague responses about Earth's commitment to peaceful solutions and diplomatic cooperation. This seemed to satisfy most delegates, who continued to view humans as useful but unremarkable allies. But So Young noticed things that others missed. She saw how Tejo's expression never changed, even when discussing the most serious threats. She watched him make small notes that seemed random but followed patterns she recognized from their training. Most importantly, she noticed that he was listening to everything with the kind of attention that suggested he was filing away every detail for later analysis. As the day session ended, the hall buzzed with continuing conversations. Delegates clustered in new combinations, clearly forming the kind of informal alliances that often mattered more than official treaties. The galaxy's political landscape was shifting, driven by fear of threats that seemed to be growing stronger. And Boulder. Tejo packed his materials slowly, giving himself time to observe the various groups still talking. Tomorrow would bring more discussions, but tonight would bring private meetings where the real decisions got made. The question was whether those decisions would lead to greater cooperation or simply prepare the ground for future conflicts. So Young finished her notes and closed her tablet. She had recorded everything as always, but she suspected that the most important information from today's session was not what had been said openly, but what could be learned from watching how each species reacted when they felt threatened. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place, and everyone knew it. The question that remained was what each species intended to do about it. The third day started differently. Instead of the usual formal assembly, Chancellor Vorthak had arranged for a more relaxed discussion session. Delegates sat in smaller circles throughout the hall, with refreshments available nearby. The idea was to encourage more open conversation about the security concerns that had dominated the previous day's meetings. Tejo found himself in a mixed group that included Vextar, Bront, Quillith, and representatives from several smaller species. Park So Young sat slightly behind him, her tablet ready but her attention focused on the conversations happening around the room. The discussion began with theoretical questions. What if the Void Hunters attacked multiple systems at once? How would different species coordinate their defenses? Who would take command in a joint military operation? These were the kinds of questions that revealed how each species really thought about power and cooperation. Vextar dominated much of the conversation, as expected. His golden scales caught the light as he gestured with clawed hands, describing the Saurian Empire's military capabilities. Our battle fleets have defended the Outer Rim for 2 centuries, he said with obvious pride. When the Crystal Wars threatened to consume entire sectors, Saurian ships restored order. When the plague ships tried to spread their disease, we stopped them with fire and void. Bront nodded approvingly. The massive Kronak ambassador respected strength, even in species he might consider rivals. The Kronax understand this thinking, he rumbled. Peace comes from strength, not from hoping enemies will be reasonable. Our warrior clans have kept the trade routes safe because merchants know we will fight for them. The Etherian representative, Quillith, pulsed with gentle light patterns that suggested disagreement without direct confrontation. Violence creates cycles that repeat across generations, they said in their musical voice. The Etherians have survived longer than most species, by understanding when to fight and when to step away from conflict. A delegate from the insectoid hive clicked her mandibles nervously. Easy words for those with strong fleets, she said. Smaller species cannot choose when to fight. We must hope that alliances will protect us when threats come. This led to a discussion about mutual defense agreements and who could be trusted in a crisis. Each species made subtle claims about their reliability while questioning others' commitment. The Saurians suggested that only military strength guaranteed protection. The Kronax argued that warrior honor was more important than signed treaties. The Etherians spoke of ancient wisdom and long-term thinking. As the morning progressed, a conversation became more specific. Delegates began sharing information about actual threats they had encountered. The Verdani described attacks on their agricultural worlds by unknown raiders. The aquatic deepers mentioned strange signals from the deep ocean planets that might indicate void hunter activity. The Silicon Crystarch reported that entire asteroid mining operations had vanished without explanation. During a break in the conversation, Bront consumed a large quantity of fermented algae drink that the Kronax preferred. The alcohol made him more talkative than usual, and his voice grew louder as he began questioning other species' military capabilities. The problem with this galaxy, he said, gesturing broadly with his thick arms, is that too many species think talking will solve everything. When the void hunters come, they will not negotiate. When rogue fleets attack, they will not listen to diplomatic protests. He turned his attention to the smaller species in the group. What will you do when real war comes? Hide behind bigger allies? Hope someone else will fight for you? The hive delegate's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. Not all species are built for war like the Kronax, she replied. We contribute in other ways: intelligence gathering, resource production, technological support. Useful, Bront acknowledged, but wars are won by those willing to kill and die, not by those who provide supplies from safe distances. His gaze moved around the circle, evaluating each delegate as if they were potential enemies rather than allies. When his eyes reached Tejo, he paused and let out what might have been a laugh. And what about humans? He asked, his voice carrying amusement, mixed with contempt. Earth joined the galaxy 50 years ago, but what can you offer in a real fight? Your ships are decent but not impressive. Your technology works but breaks no new ground. Your soldiers are adequate but lack experience in serious warfare. He leaned forward, his stone-like face showing what passed for a grin among Kronax. Tell me, Tejo, what would your peaceful little species do if faced with a coalition of hostile forces? What happens when diplomacy fails and talking time ends? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Other delegates turned to look at Tejo, some with curiosity, others with the kind of polite interest reserved for watching someone else face an uncomfortable situation. Humans were generally well-liked, but not considered particularly formidable in military terms. Tejo took a sip of his coffee, considering the question with the same calm attention he gave to routine trade disputes. His expression never changed, and his voice remained steady when he finally responded. Well, he said, as if discussing something as mundane as weather patterns, that would depend on which specific combination of species we're talking about. We have different contingency plans depending on the opposition. The casual tone of his response made it take a moment for the meaning to sink in. Quile's light form flickered with what humans had learned indicated surprise. The hive delegate's mandibles stopped clicking entirely. Even Vextar's confident posture shifted slightly. Park So Young, recognizing the change in atmosphere, quietly moved her hand to her tablet. She had seen this moment in training simulations, the point where information that should have remained classified accidentally entered a conversation. Her job was to support whatever came next. Bront blinked his small eyes, processing what he had just heard. Plans? He repeated. You mean theoretical strategies like military academies teach? No, Tejo replied matter-of-factly. I mean comprehensive operational contingencies. Updated quarterly and tested through regular simulations. We analyze all potential conflict scenarios involving Galactic Council members. The silence that followed was different from the usual pauses in diplomatic conversations. This was the kind of silence that occurred when everyone suddenly realized they had misunderstood something fundamental. Quillith was the first to speak, their musical voice carrying notes of concern. You said all potential conflict scenarios. Do you mean Earth has contingency plans for every species represented in the Galactic Council? Teho nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the galaxy. Of course, standard diplomatic protocol requires understanding all possible situations. We maintain comprehensive analyses for every member species, military capabilities, economic vulnerabilities, social structures, probable alliance patterns. He paused to take another sip of coffee before continuing. It would be irresponsible to engage in galactic diplomacy without proper preparation for various outcomes. The delegates stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. The human species they had dismissed as minor players in galactic politics had just revealed that they had been quietly studying everyone else with apparently frightening thoroughness. Vextar's amber eyes narrowed. When you say comprehensive analyzes, he said slowly, exactly how detailed are these studies? Detailed enough to be useful, Taiho replied with the same conversational tone. Military doctrine, economic dependencies, cultural pressure points, leadership structures, historical behavior patterns under stress. Park So-young decided it was time to add supporting information. We also maintain current intelligence on fleet movements, resource allocation, and diplomatic communications, she said in her crisp, professional voice. The analyses are updated whenever new information becomes available. The revelation was spreading through the room like ripples in water. Delegates who had been having separate conversations were beginning to notice the unusual quiet in Teho's circle. Some were moving closer, drawn by curiosity about what could make a group of experienced diplomats look so unsettled. What had started as a casual question about human military capabilities had become something much more significant. The other species were beginning to realize that while they had been viewing humans as newcomers to galactic politics, Earth had been systematically studying every potential friend and enemy in known space. The comfortable assumptions about human nature and capabilities were crumbling, replaced by questions about what else they might have missed about their supposedly harmless new neighbors. Word of the human revelation spread through the assembly hall like wildfire. Within minutes, delegates who had been engaged in separate conversations were gathering around Teho's circle. The relaxed atmosphere Chancellor Vorthak had hoped to create was replaced by something much more intense. Vextar's golden scales seemed to darken as he leaned forward. You mentioned economic vulnerabilities, he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. What exactly does Earth know about Saurian economic structures? Teho maintained his calm expression as if he were discussing trade statistics rather than military intelligence. Well, for example, your empire's expansion depends heavily on the rare minerals from your 3 core mining worlds. Specifically, the Zarian crystals that power your battle fleet engines. Those crystals only form under very specific conditions found in your home system. The Saurian ambassador's amber eyes widened slightly. The Zarian crystal mines were supposed to be classified information, known only to the highest levels of the Saurian military command. How could you possibly know that? Public information, mostly, Park So-young interjected, pulling up her tablet. Trade records show unusual patterns in your resource imports. Scientific papers published by your universities describe the crystal formation process. Military reports that your government releases mention engine specifications. We simply connected the information that was already available. She touched her screen and a holographic display appeared above the table. The projection showed a detailed breakdown of Saurian trade routes, resource flows, and manufacturing capabilities. The analysis was so thorough it included backup suppliers, transportation bottlenecks, and estimated production capacities. Of course, Park So-young continued matter-of-factly, We also identified 17 different ways to disrupt these supply chains if necessary. Everything from trade sanctions to targeted strikes on key transportation hubs. The silence in the growing crowd was deafening. Quilath's light form pulsed rapidly, indicating what humans had learned was extreme agitation in Aetherons. You mentioned social structures, they said, their musical voice strained. What do you know about Aetheran society? Teho nodded politely. Your species has a fascinating collective consciousness network. Individual Aetherans maintain their independence, but you share thoughts and emotions through psychic connections during your daily meditation cycles. These cycles occur at predictable times based on your circadian rhythms. He paused to sip his coffee before continuing. The interesting tactical consideration is that during these meditation periods, your defensive capabilities are significantly reduced. Your entire species essentially becomes vulnerable for approximately 2 hours every 26-hour cycle. Quilath's form flickered with what could only be described as shock. The meditation cycles were not secret, but the fact that they created a species-wide vulnerability was something Aetherans preferred not to discuss with outsiders. Bront, the Kronak ambassador who had started this entire conversation, looked less amused than he had earlier. And what about Kronak weaknesses? He demanded. Your warrior culture is both your greatest strength and your primary vulnerability, Teho replied without hesitation. Kronak society is organized around competing clans, each with their own territories and honor codes. These clans cooperate when facing external threats, but they have deep historical rivalries that could be exploited. Park So-young brought up another holographic display, this one showing the complex web of Kronak clan relationships. Clan Stonehammer still resents Clan Ironforge for the Bloodstone incident 3 centuries ago. Clan Stormbreaker has ongoing territorial disputes with Clan Voidwalker. In a prolonged conflict, these divisions could be used to prevent unified Kronak military action. The display showed detailed genealogies, territorial maps, and historical grievance patterns that would have taken decades to compile. The fact that humans possessed this information about internal Kronak politics was deeply unsettling to Bront, whose stone-like face showed the first signs of genuine concern. A delegate from the Silicon Crystarch pushed forward through the crowd. Their metallic voice rang with digital precision. Surely you cannot have such detailed information about all species present. Actually, we do, Park So-young said, her fingers dancing across her tablet. Would you like to see the analysis for the Crystarch Collective? We have detailed studies of your distributed processing networks, manufacturing capabilities, and the hierarchical command structures that govern your silicon-based society. She brought up a new display that showed the Crystarch homeworlds as interconnected nodes in a vast computational network. The analysis included processing capacities, communication delays, and what appeared to be detailed maps of their underground server farms. We also identified the cascade failure scenarios. That could disrupt your entire civilization, she added casually. Silicon-based life forms have fascinating vulnerabilities related to electromagnetic interference and specific frequency resonances. The Crystarch delegates' optical sensors flickered rapidly, their equivalent of rapid blinking in biological species. The existence of cascade failure scenarios was theoretical knowledge that should have been impossible for outsiders to discover, let alone analyze in detail. More delegates pressed forward, each demanding to know what information Earth possessed about their species. The Verdani wanted to know about agricultural vulnerabilities. The aquatic deepers asked about oceanic defense systems. The insectoid hive demanded information about their collective intelligence networks. Teho and Park So-young responded to each question with the same calm professionalism, revealing levels of knowledge that grew more disturbing with each revelation. They knew about hidden military bases, classified research projects, secret alliance negotiations, and internal political struggles that most species thought were completely confidential. The holographic displays continued to appear and disappear, each one showing analysis so detailed and accurate that it left the targeted species delegates stunned. Economic warfare scenarios, cultural manipulation techniques, biological countermeasures, technological vulnerabilities, psychological pressure. Points. How long have you been gathering this information? Vextar demanded, his diplomatic composure finally cracking. Since Earth joined the Galactic Council, Tejo replied. 50 years of systematic observation, analysis, and strategic planning. We started the moment we realized we would need to coexist with dozens of species whose capabilities and intentions were unknown to us. But surely this goes beyond normal diplomatic intelligence, Quillith protested. You are describing capabilities for economic warfare, cultural subversion, and military action against every species in the galaxy. Park So-young nodded matter-of-factly. Comprehensive contingency planning requires considering all possible scenarios. We needed to understand not just how to cooperate with each species, but also how to defend against them if cooperation failed. She gestured to her tablet, which displayed a complex flowchart showing interconnected scenario trees. Every 6 months, we run detailed simulations of potential conflicts involving various combinations of species, single opponents, alliance structures, multi-front wars, economic blockades, technological races. The flowchart was mind-boggling in its complexity. Thousands of potential scenarios branched out like a vast tree, each one leading to sub-scenarios that considered different variables and outcomes. The scope of the analysis was so comprehensive that it covered situations most delegates had never even imagined. A junior delegate from the hive, her mandibles clicking nervously, asked the question that everyone was thinking but hadn't dared to voice. Do you have contingency plans for a scenario where all species in the Galactic Council unite against humanity? Tejo paused for a moment, considering the question with the same thoughtful attention he had given to all the others. When he answered, his voice carried the same conversational tone that had characterized all his responses. That's certainly our most challenging scenario, he admitted, but yes, we have several approaches for that contingency as well. The admission sent a wave of shock through the assembled delegates. Even their worst-case scenario, the entire galaxy united against a single species, was something humanity had anticipated and planned for. The comfortable assumptions about human capabilities and intentions were completely shattered. What had seemed like a minor diplomatic species was revealed to be something far more formidable and far-thinking than anyone had imagined. The assembly hall had transformed into something unrecognizable. What had begun as a casual discussion session was now a tense gathering where every delegate stared at the two humans, with expressions ranging from fear to calculation. The comfortable rhythm of galactic diplomacy had been shattered by revelations that changed everything. Chancellor Vorthek finally pushed through the crowd, his forearms gesturing for calm that nobody seemed interested in providing. Perhaps we should return to our scheduled agenda, he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. The normal business of trade disputes and territorial agreements seemed trivial compared to what had just been revealed. Vextar ignored the Chancellor entirely, his golden scales catching the light as he turned to face Tejo directly. You speak of contingencies as if they are theoretical exercises, he said, his voice carrying the authority of an empire. But what you describe sounds like preparation for conquest. Not conquest, Tejo replied with the same calm tone he had maintained throughout the discussion. Defense. Every scenario we plan for begins with someone else initiating hostilities against Earth or human colonies. We do not start wars, but we prepare to finish them. Park So-young nodded in agreement. Our contingency plans are reactive, not aggressive. The goal is always to end conflicts as quickly as possible with minimal casualties on all sides. She touched her tablet again, bringing up a new display that showed conflict resolution timelines. Our simulations focus on achieving rapid conclusions to hypothetical wars. Extended conflicts create suffering for everyone involved, so our strategies emphasize decisive action that leads to negotiated settlements. Braunt studied the timeline display with the eye of an experienced warrior. Despite his earlier bravado, he was beginning to understand that human military thinking operated on a level he had not anticipated. These timelines, he said slowly, They assume very short conflicts. How do you plan to end wars so quickly? Superior information and precise targeting, Park So-young answered matter-of-factly. When you understand an opponent's critical vulnerabilities, you can apply pressure at exactly the right points to achieve your objectives without unnecessary destruction. The implications were staggering. The humans were not just talking about winning potential conflicts, they were describing the ability to end them on their own terms with surgical precision. Quillet's light form pulsed with agitated patterns. This level of preparation suggests Earth has been planning for Galactic War since joining the Council. How can you claim peaceful intentions while developing such capabilities? Because the best way to ensure peace is to make war unattractive to potential aggressors, Taeho replied. If everyone knows that attacking Earth would result in swift and decisive retaliation, they are less likely to consider aggression in the first place. He gestured around the room at the assembled delegates. Look at this gathering. 50 years ago, when Earth first joined the Council, how many of you would have considered humans a serious military threat? The honest answer was obvious to everyone present. Humans had been viewed as useful but unremarkable newcomers to galactic politics. Their technology was adequate, their ships were decent, and their diplomats were polite. Nobody had seen them as a major military power. Now, Taeho continued, you are all reconsidering your assumptions about human capabilities. That reconsideration makes conflicts less likely, not more likely. It is much easier to maintain peace when everyone understands the true costs of war. A delegate from one of the smaller species, an insectoid from the outer rim, clicked her mandibles nervously. But what about species that cannot threaten Earth? What about those who simply want to coexist peacefully? Our contingency plans include scenarios for protecting smaller species from larger aggressors, Park So-young replied. Military strength that only serves self-defense is ultimately limited in its usefulness. True security comes from maintaining stability throughout the region. She brought up another display showing defensive alliance structures. Many of our scenarios involve Earth intervening to protect smaller species from imperial expansion or predatory behavior by larger powers. This revelation created a new dynamic in the room. The smaller species began looking at the humans with something closer to hope than fear, while the larger military powers grew even more concerned about human intentions. The discussions continued for another hour, with delegates asking increasingly specific questions about human capabilities and intentions. Each answer revealed new layers of preparation and strategic thinking that left the assembled representatives struggling to process the implications. As the day's session finally ended, the delegates began filing out of the hall in unusual configurations. Species that normally ignored each other were deep in conversation. Traditional allies were eyeing each other with new suspicion. The entire structure of galactic politics was shifting in real time. Tae-ho and Park So-young began packing their materials with the same methodical care they had shown throughout their diplomatic career. Around them, the hall gradually emptied as delegates rushed to contact their home governments with news of the day's revelations. Do you think we revealed too much? Park So-young asked quietly in Korean, ensuring their conversation remained private. Tae-ho considered the question while organizing his papers. The same careful attention he applied to diplomatic negotiations now focused on evaluating the consequences of their unplanned disclosure. Perhaps, he admitted, but it was inevitable that our capabilities would become known eventually. Better to establish our position from strength than to be underestimated until a crisis forced our hand. And if they form coalitions against U.S. now? Taeho paused in his packing and looked around the nearly empty hall. Through the transparent floor, the stars wheeled slowly in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the political upheavals of the species that traveled between them. Then we implement Contingency Plan Omega-7, he said with a slight smile. We did account for this possibility, after all. Park So-young returned the smile. They had always known that their intelligence gathering and strategic planning would eventually be discovered. The question had never been whether their capabilities would be revealed, But when and under what circumstances, as they walked through the corridors of Nexus Station toward their quarters, other delegates stepped aside to let them pass. The casual dismissal that humans had grown accustomed to was replaced by careful respect and wary attention. Conversations stopped when they appeared and resumed in whispers after they passed in their private quarters. Tejo activated his secure communication system and began composing his report to Earth. The message would travel through quantum relays to reach human space within hours, allowing the government to prepare for whatever diplomatic and military responses their revelation might provoke. "The cat is out of the bag," he typed in his characteristic understated style. "Recommend implementing Protocol 7 Alpha immediately. Full intelligence capabilities are now known to all Council members. Suggest we prepare for accelerated timeline on all contingency scenarios." Meanwhile, throughout the station, other delegates were sending their own urgent messages home, warning of human capabilities they had never suspected, questioning alliances they had taken for granted, proposing new partnerships based on the changed balance of power. The galaxy's political landscape was transforming as news of human strategic depth spread through communication networks. Species that had ignored Earth for 50 years were suddenly very interested in human intentions and capabilities. Traditional power structures were being reevaluated based on new information about who could really threaten whom. In the depths of space, automated monitoring systems registered the sudden spike in encrypted communications between Council member worlds. The network of intelligence-gathering satellites and listening posts that Earth had quietly deployed over 5 decades began tracking the responses to their revelation with the same systematic thoroughness that had characterized all their preparations. The humans had spent 50 years preparing for every possible scenario they could imagine. Now they would discover whether their preparations were sufficient for the reality they had created by letting the galaxy know just how prepared they really were. The next few months would test whether human strategic thinking was as comprehensive as they believed, or whether they had finally encountered a scenario even their extensive planning had failed to anticipate. What was certain was that the galaxy would never again make the mistake of underestimating the quiet species from the small blue planet that had spent half a century learning everyone else's secrets while keeping their own capabilities hidden in plain sight.